In December 2008, the smartest investors on Wall Street woke up to discover that $65 billion had simply vanished. Not in a market crash, not in a bad trade. It had been stolen, slowly, methodically, over nearly 2 decades, by a man they had trusted completely. A man who had chaired the Nasdaq Stock Exchange. A man who had built what they believed was the most exclusive investment fund in the world. His name was Bernie Madoff, and the fraud he ran wasn't complicated. That's what made it so devastating. This story isn't just about one criminal. It's about how the most prestigious financial regulators in the world were warned, repeatedly, for over a decade, and ignored every single warning. It's about 37,000 victims across 136 countries. Pensioners, Holocaust survivors, charities, celebrities, banks, all of them wiped out. And it's about one analyst, a man who wasn't even working for the government, who figured it all out in the year 2000 and spent the next 8 years screaming into the void while nobody listened. If you have a pension, a savings account, an investment portfolio, this story is about you. Because what allowed Madoff to keep going for 20 years still exists in every financial system on Earth today. Bernie Madoff was born in Queens, New York in 1938. He wasn't born rich. He wasn't a genius. He was, by all accounts, ordinary. At 22 years old, fresh out of Hofstra University with a political science degree, he started a small investment firm with $5,000 he'd saved from working as a lifeguard. Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities was, in the beginning, completely legitimate. Madoff had a gift, not for picking stocks, but for people. He cultivated relationships with wealthy businessmen in New York and Palm Beach. He signed them as investors, paid them steady returns, and used their recommendations to attract more. His firm grew not through advertising, but through whispers. Bernie gets you into things you can't get into on your own. By the 1980s, his firm was one of the largest broker-dealers in the United States. At one point, it was processing 10 to 15% of all trading orders on the New York Stock Exchange. In 1990, Madoff became chairman of the Nasdaq stock market. Let that sink in. The man running the biggest financial fraud in history was, at the same moment, chairing one of the world's most important financial exchanges. His investment fund had a waiting list. You didn't call Madoff, Madoff called you. And if he didn't, you paid someone else to get an introduction. The returns he offered weren't spectacular. Around 10 to 12% per year, consistently. In good years and bad years. That consistency, that impossible, unbroken consistency, was, as it turned out, the only clue anyone needed. But nobody wanted to see it, because the feeling of being a Madoff investor was intoxicating. You weren't just wealthy, you were chosen. In the year 2000, a financial analyst named Harry Markopolos sat down at his desk with a stack of Madoff's performance reports. His boss had asked him a simple question. Can we replicate what Madoff is doing? Markopolos ran the numbers. Then he ran them again. Then he called a colleague. Then he looked up at the ceiling for a long time. What Madoff was claiming to do was mathematically impossible. The option strategy he described couldn't generate the returns he was reporting. The market he claimed to be trading in wasn't even large enough to absorb the trades he said he was making. Within 4 hours, Markopolos concluded that Bernie Madoff was running a Ponzi scheme. He reported it to the SEC. The SEC did nothing. He reported it again in 2001. Then again in 2005, with a 17-page detailed submission titled, bluntly, "The world's largest hedge fund is a fraud." The SEC investigated. They found nothing, because they didn't know what to look for. They never once checked with the Depository Trust Company, the organization that records every actual stock trade made in the United States. If they had, they would have found no record of a single Madoff trade. Meanwhile, Madoff continued. Here is how the fraud actually worked. It was not complicated. There were no exotic financial instruments, no complex algorithms. In the back offices of his firm's 17th floor, kept separate from the legitimate business above, A small team of employees simply made up monthly statements. They looked up old stock prices in back issues of the Wall Street Journal, chose which stocks to pretend they traded, and printed out statements showing consistent, modest, believable returns. Real clients receiving fake statements backed by real money, money from new investors used to pay out old ones. A classic Ponzi scheme, running inside the office of the former chairman of NASDAQ. And it worked because of one thing above all others: trust. Madoff had spent 40 years building a reputation so ironclad that nobody, not the SEC, not JP Morgan Chase who held his accounts, not the auditors at KPMG and PricewaterhouseCoopers, asked hard questions. In 2006, the SEC investigator assigned to look into Madoff left the agency. She married Madoff's niece. This actually happened. In September 2008, Lehman Brothers collapsed. The global financial crisis hit, and suddenly Madoff's investors needed their money back. Between September and December 2008, clients requested $7 billion in withdrawals. Madoff had $200 to $300 million left. On the 9th of December 2008, he called his sons Mark and Andrew into his apartment. Ruth Madoff sat nearby, and he told them the truth. The investment fund was a lie. Every statement was fabricated. There was nothing left. It had been, as he put it himself, just one big lie. His sons walked out and called the FBI. The next morning, federal agents knocked on Madoff's door. "I know why you're here," he said. "I was expecting you." He was arrested, charged with 11 federal felonies. On March the 12th, 2009, he pleaded guilty to every one of them. The sentence, 150 years in prison. Effectively, the rest of his life. The victims, 37,000 people in 136 countries. Among them, the Elie Wiesel Foundation for Humanity, the Nobel Peace Prize winner who had survived the Holocaust, lost his entire life savings of $12 million and his charity's $15 million endowment. Actors Kevin Bacon and Kyra Sedgwick lost millions. The New York Mets owner had to sell the team. Banks across Europe collapsed because of their exposure to Madoff feeder funds. 2 of Madoff's victims committed suicide. His son Mark hanged himself on the 2nd anniversary of his father's arrest. Bernie Madoff died in prison on April the 14th, 2021, aged 82. Markopoulos, the analyst who cracked it in 4 hours, was finally vindicated. He later wrote a book called No One Would Listen. The SEC was overhauled. New whistleblower protections were introduced. More than $4.3 billion was recovered and returned to victims, about 94% of proven losses. But here is what stayed with me when I researched this story. Madoff didn't run the scheme because he needed money. His legitimate brokerage business made him extraordinarily wealthy. He ran it, as best as anyone can tell, because he couldn't stop. Because the identity he had built, the exclusive genius, the man who couldn't be questioned, required the lie to continue. And the investors who lost everything, they weren't stupid. They were doctors, lawyers, retirees, charities. People who had done what we're all told to do: hand your money to an expert, someone with credibility, someone trusted by people you trust. The lesson of Bernie Madoff is not to be smarter. It's to ask the question that nobody else is asking. Because when everybody believes the same thing, that's usually when you're already inside the lie. If you want to see the next collapse before it happens, subscribe. We cover the stories the financial media misses.